What if some stones had not just been placed but remembered? What if certain walls were not just defense structures but messages left in time, waiting for the right moment to be understood? High in the mountains of Peru, where the air is thin and the silence seems older than humanity itself, there exists a place that defies not only modern engineering, but our idea of who we are and where we came from. Ollantaytambo is not imposing due to its height. He is imposed by presence. There is something there that cannot be explained with just dates, tools, or academic theories. Something you feel before you even understand yourself. Perhaps you have already seen images of these megalithic walls, colossal blocks, fitted together with such perfect precision that a blade cannot pass between them. Stones of dozens of tons, molded as if they were clay, suspended in a terrain where even today modern machines face difficulties. But the real mystery is not just the how, it's in the why. Why would someone build something like this in such an extreme place? Why invest such precision, such intention, in a wall that seems more a petrified ritual than a simple military work? Ancient cultures believed that stone holds memory, that the mountain is alive, what certain places function as portals between the visible and the invisible. And when you walk by Ollantaytambo, there is a strange and persistent feeling that it is not just visiting ruins, but entering a space that still observes. Science tries to answer with numbers, chronologies, and hypotheses. Archaeology talks about Incas in ingenious techniques, in collective human effort. But something doesn't close completely. There is an excess of precision, a silence of responses, an absence of annoying errors. And it is precisely in this discomfort that the mystery begins to breathe. If you feel, even in a subtle way, that certain things in human history are not simple coincidences, maybe this video is exactly what you needed to find now. Not to offer ready-made answers, but to open up questions that were asleep. Today we are not just going to talk about a wall. Let's hear what she still tries to tell us. And perhaps in the end, you will realize that Ollantaytambo's biggest enigma is not in the stones, but in something that they awaken within us. Ollantaytambo didn't come out of nowhere. Before he was a name in the history books, he was already a point of convergence between mountain, water, and sky. The Incas called this type of place of Huaca, a space where the sacred manifests itself naturally. Nothing there was chosen at random. The position of the valley, the course of the Urubamba River, the steepness of the slopes, everything seemed to obey an invisible design, as if the landscape itself had been consulted before the first stone is touched. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they were impressed, but also confused. Accustomed to European fortresses made of mortar and straight lines, there, they found walls that seemed to grow from the rock. Some blocks exceed 50 tons and were brought from distant quarries, crossing rivers and terrain steep. The obvious question immediately arises: how to move, lift, and fit these stones without wheels, without iron, without draft animals? The traditional explanation talks about ramps, ropes, human strength, and time. A long time. But this narrative begins to fail when looking at the finish. The stones are not just big, they are asymmetrical, fitted like a puzzle, three-dimensional. Internal angles, curved cuts, precise projections. There is no standard repetitive. Each block appears to have been molded specifically for that location, as if someone had carved the stone already imagining its final destination. Modern engineers privately admit that reproducing this type of fit would be extremely expensive and complex today. Not impossible, but unlikely without technology-advanced measurement. Still, the Incas left no written records explaining the method. No manual, no technical drawings, just the work completed. This raises an uncomfortable hypothesis. What if the knowledge used had not been fully created by them but inherited? Some archaeologists suggest that Ollantaytambo was built on a much deeper foundation. Old, a forgotten foundation, belonging to a previous civilization, absorbed or reinterpreted by the Incas. This idea does not diminish the Incas. On the contrary, they were masters at recognizing places of power and restoring them. As gardeners of the sacred, know they created from scratch but awakened what was already dormant. When you look at the main wall, something curious happens. The look is lost. There is no obvious weak point. There are no obvious break lines. It is as if the structure had designed not only to resist time, but to dialogue with it. Earthquakes pass, centuries pass, empires fall. The stones remain, silent, like felt in them of a memory that insists on not disappearing. And perhaps that's what bothers the most. Not the weight of stones, but the weight of intention. Ollantaytambo seems to carry a purpose that escapes purely utilitarian logic. Strength? Ceremonial center? Observatory? Maybe all of this at the same time. Or maybe something we haven't yet learned to name. Because not all knowledge is born to be explained. Some exist only to be felt. As we progress through this story, a question begins to echo more clearly. Intimate. What do these constructions say about the ancient human mind? Maybe our ancestors were not primitives trying to survive, but deep observers of the nature, capable of integrating engineering, spirituality, and landscape in a single gesture. A wisdom that did not separate science from faith, matter from spirit. If so, the mystery of Ollantaytambo is not just archaeological, it's a mirror. He forces us to reconsider the timeline of human consciousness, accepting that maybe we have forgotten more than we learned. And as we walk, among these walls, something silent seems to ask if we are ready to remember, or if we need more time to listen. And in the next step of this journey, we will go even deeper, because under the stones, visible are alignments, symbols, and geographical choices that suggest something greater, an intention that connects heaven, earth, and consciousness. The wall that defies explanation, it may be pointing to knowledge that was not lost. It just waited. Perhaps the right question is not how they did it, but why we failed to do. What changed in our relationship with the world so that so much spiritual precision become an exception? This answer begins to emerge when we look beyond the stone. And this is where the true mystery begins to slowly unfold before us now. There is a detail in Ollantaytambo that rarely appears in tourist photographs, but which completely changes the way the place is understood. Not only are the stones, it's their relationship with heaven. The city was built on a precise axis, aligned with specific astronomical events, such as solstices and solar cycles. For the Incas, the heaven was not a distant scene. It was a living calendar, a mirror of the invisible order that governs all things. During the winter solstice, sunlight rises exactly between two mountains specific, illuminating key points of the structure. None of this is accidental. This type of alignment requires continuous observation over generations, requires mathematics, patience, and a deep understanding of natural cycles. More than that, it requires intention spiritual, because observing the sky, for them, was a way of listening to the gods. Some modern researchers suggest that Ollantaytambo functioned as a kind of interface between worlds, a point where the human and the cosmic met. The piped water that runs through the city was not just used for irrigation. She produced sound, vibration, movement. In many ancient traditions, flowing water was considered an energy conductor, an element capable of carrying subtle information. When you walk through the still active channels, you notice something curious. The sound of water it's chaotic. It feels rhythmic, almost intentional, as if the city had been tuned, as an instrument. Stone, water, light, and silence forming a single system. One architecture that not only served to protect bodies, but to align consciousnesses. This brings us to a perplexing question. What if Ollantaytambo wasn't just a fortress or an administrative center, but a space of initiation? A place where the individual was exposed to stimuli carefully calculated to provoke states expanded perception. The mountain as a temple, the wall as a symbolic limit between the profane and the sacred. Carl Jung said that certain symbols are not created by the human mind but discovered. They emerge from the collective unconscious when the culture is ready to access them. Maybe places like Ollantaytambo are just that, materialized symbols. Geometries that speak directly to deep parts of the psyche, without needing words. This would explain why so many people report intense emotional experiences when visiting the location. An inexplicable feeling of familiarity, as if something there recognized who arrives. Science calls this a neurological response to the environment. The ancient traditions, they called it a memory of the soul. Two different names for the same phenomenon. The Incas did not see time as a straight line. For them, the Past was ahead, visible, while the future came behind, invisible. Building in stone was a way of talk to the past and offer something to the future. A silent message crossing centuries, awaiting minds capable of perceiving it. And maybe we're starting to get to that point. In an era saturated with technology, something in us lack of meaning, lack of connection with the earth, with the sky, with slower rhythms. Ollantaytambo then appears as an uncomfortable reminder. We've already been capable of integrating all of this without separating science from spirituality. If something inside you is awakening while listening to this story, stay until the end. The answer you are looking for may not be in books or theories, but in a silent change of perspective. Because understanding Ollantaytambo is not just understand the past, it is recognizing a forgotten possibility for the future. And as we move forward, a new layer of mystery begins to reveal itself, one which involves not only the Incas but previous civilizations erased by time, layers upon layers of knowledge like sediments of memory. And perhaps, at the remove one more of these layers, we discover that we were never really separate from what we call sacred. There is a moment when the mystery of Ollantaytambo stops being just technical and becomes touching something deeper. That's when we realize that the wall wasn't just built to be seen from the outside, but to be experienced from the inside. Every step, every curve of the land, each sudden change of perspective seems to take the visitor through a carefully orchestrated. It is not a neutral space. It's a journey. The Incas understood the human body as part of the environment, not separate from it. Walking was a ritual act. Climbing the mountain, a process of transformation. The altitude changes breathing, heart rate, perception of time. Today we call it physiological effect. For them, it was spiritual preparation. The body needed to be changed to that. The mind could hear. Megalithic walls in this context function as thresholds, not just limits physical but symbolic borders. When crossing them, something changes. The sense of scale, of silence, of weight. The stone imposes presence. She slows down. It forces the visitor to adjust, to abandon the common rush of the everyday world. This is not accidental. It's conscious design. Some scholars suggest that the Incas mastered a type of knowledge that today we would call it psychogeography, the ability to shape space to influence states internal. Cities were not just functional clusters but extensions of the mind collective. Ollantaytambo, then, would be an architecture of consciousness, a built place to align the individual with something greater than themselves. This idea gains strength when we observe the repetition of certain patterns. Niches trapezoidal, inclined doors, polygonal fittings. These forms appear not only there, but in other important sites in the Andes. They resist. Earthquakes better, yes. But they also have a specific visual effect. The look does not find rigid lines. Everything appears to be in slight movement, even when standing still. The mind is not fixed. It flows. In many spiritual traditions, momentary loss of reference is essential to initiation. Confused to rearrange, destabilized to expand. Perhaps these forms, architectural structures, served exactly this purpose. Not just protect against forces of nature, but cause micro-ruptures in common perception. And then an even more disturbing question arises. Where did this knowledge come from? The Incas did not see themselves as absolute inventors. In their myths, they spoke of times previous ones, of teachers coming from far away, from destroyed and renewed eras. The figure of Viracocha, the great civilizer, appears as someone who emerges after a cataclysm to reorganize the world. A symbol, perhaps, or a distorted memory. Some independent researchers suggest that Ollantaytambo may contain traces of a much older tradition, predating the Incas themselves, a heritage preserved in stone when other forms of recording were lost. If this is true, then these walls do not just belong to a specific culture, but to a lineage of knowledge transmitted through cycles of destruction and rebirth. This would explain the feeling of anachronism, the impression that the place does not fit perfectly into the official narrative of the story, as if displaced in time, too advanced for the past, too simple to be modern, trapped in a range that defies categories. Maybe that's why Ollantaytambo is so annoying. He offers no easy answers. He demands presence, and by demanding presence, it reveals something about the observer. The mystery does not. It's not just in the stones, but in the reaction they provoke. A silent invitation to humility in the face of the unknown. When you recognize this, something begins to change. The question is no longer, how did they do it? And becomes, what they knew. What kind of relationship with the world allows you to build like this? What vision of reality integrates matter, spirit, and landscape without conflict? In the next step of this journey, we will explore an even more subtle element. Something that, it is not easily seen, but it runs through the entire structure like an invisible thread. One principle that connects Ollantaytambo to other megalithic sites around the planet. Why perhaps this wall is not isolated. Perhaps it is part of a global language, forgotten, but still active for those who know how to listen. There is an invisible thread that runs through Ollantaytambo and connects the place to something much bigger than the Andes. It is not a physical tunnel, nor a path marked on the ground. It's a principle, a silent logic that also appears in other megalithic sites throughout the world planet. Machu Picchu, Sacsayhuaman, Tiahuanaco, and, outside the Americas, places like Giza, Baalbek, and Stonehenge. Structures distant in space, but strangely close in intention. This thread is the conscious choice of specific points on Earth, places where mountains, groundwater, geological faults, and magnetic fields meet. Today, some scientists talk about energy lines, others about geophysical resonance. Ancient cultures, they simply spoke in living places, points where the Earth breathes differently. Ollantaytambo is exactly on one of these natural nodes. The Urubamba River bends there as if restrained by an invisible force. The mountains form a natural amphitheater. The rock used in the walls was not chosen only for its resistance, but for its mineral composition. Certain types of stone interact in particular ways with vibration and sound. This is not mysticism. It's basic physics, known today and intuited long before. When wind, water, and human footsteps travel through this type of structure, something happens. Frequencies overlap. Space responds. Perhaps that is why many old reports describe these locations as communication points, not in the modern sense of spoken messages, but of shared states of perception, an alignment between the individual and the environment. Ancient civilizations did not view the Earth as an inert object. She was an organism, and building on it required listening. A city was not imposed. It was negotiated with the place. Ollantaytambo seems to be the result of this negotiation, an architecture that cooperates with natural forces instead of fighting them. This brings us to an uncomfortable possibility. What if these cultures understood aspects of reality that we reduce or forget? Not technology in the sense of complex machines, but attention technology. From deep observation, from integration between mind and nature, a science that did not separate subject and object. Maybe that's why these structures resist so much, not just physically, but symbolically. They continue to provoke questions because they were constructed from universal principles: proportion, rhythm, balance. The same principles that govern the body human, music, celestial cycles. When something aligns with these laws, it remains relevant, regardless of the time. At this point in the journey, internal resistance is common. A part of us prefers simple answers, dates, names, classifications. But another part, quieter, recognizes that there is something true here, even if it is not easily explainable. If you feel it now, don't ignore it. Stay, because this discomfort usually precedes understanding. If something inside you is awakening right now, stay until the end. No because all answers will be given, but because some questions need to mature before be understood. And Ollantaytambo doesn't reveal itself to those in a hurry. The most curious thing is that none of this requires believing in extraordinary theories. Just watch with honesty, admitting that the human past may be more complex than we imagine, that the line of progress may not be straight, but cyclical. We move forward, we forget, we remember. What if we are now in one of those moments of remembrance? Ollantaytambo may be functioning as a marker, a silent reminder left by ancient hands to future minds, not telling you what to think, but inviting you to think otherwise. A subtle but profound change in the way we relate to the earth and to ourselves. As we progress, the mystery becomes even more intimate, because there comes a point where we are no longer analyzing a wall. We are being analyzed by her, observing our own reactions, beliefs, and limits. And in the next block, we will enter exactly in this delicate territory, the psychological and spiritual impact that places like Ollantaytambo exert on human consciousness, even centuries after its construction. There is a point at which the mystery of Ollantaytambo stops being external and begins to act internally. It's no longer about stones, alignments, or historical theories. It's about the effect silence that the place exerts on those who contemplate it. Environmental psychologists know that certain spaces alter mental states. Ancient cultures knew this intuitively. They built to bring about transformation, not just shelter. When a person stays long enough in Ollantaytambo, something curious happens. The mind slows down, frog. Linear thoughts lose strength. Silence is not empty, it's dense. Many report a feeling of involuntary introspection, as if the environment invites you to look inside. It's not a suggestion. It is a neurological response to space, to scale, to the rhythm imposed by architecture. This happens because the human brain reacts strongly to patterns. Irregular lines, unconventional proportions, lack of perfect symmetry. These elements break cognitive expectations. When the mind cannot easily predict what it sees, it enters a state of heightened attention. It's the same principle used in certain rituals, music, or meditative practices. Ollantaytambo does this without words. The Incas understood consciousness as something moldable. They did not separate mind, body, and environment. Everything participated in the same field of experience. Therefore, places' important states were designed to induce specific states. A warrior needed courage, a priest of clarity, an initiate of humility. Architecture helped drive these states. This suggests that the wall was not just defensive but psychological, a limit that it protected not only the territory, but the quality of the internal experience of those who entered. Cross. This limit meant abandoning external noise and entering another frequency. Perception. A space where time seemed different, slower, deeper. This idea is echoed in traditions around the world. Ancient temples, caves, ceremonial, stone circles. They all share the same basic intention: create an environment where the human being could leave automatic mode and come into contact with something more essential. Not necessarily an external God, but an internal dimension forgotten. The problem is that modernity has trained us to ignore this type of perception. We value the measurable, the replicable, the immediate. Places like Ollantaytambo defy this. They do not offer clear utility. They do not produce profit. They are not easily explained. And this is precisely why they remain relevant. They resist reduction. Perhaps this is why so many try to fit the place into extreme narratives. Or is it all perfectly explained? Or is it the work of something supernatural? But the real mystery may lie in another place, on the possibility that our ancestors knew the human mind in a more integrated way than us, that they knew how to awaken states of consciousness without digital technology, just with stone, space, and silence. This possibility is uncomfortable because it forces us to admit a loss, not of objects but of sensitivity. We lose the ability to read certain environments, to listen to what you don't speak. And when we enter a place like Ollantaytambo, something in us realizes this loss even if you don't know how to name it. This is why the experience there can be disconcerting. There is no explicit message. There are no instructions, just presence. And presence requires responsibility, requires that the observer participates rather than consumes. For many, this is uncomfortable. For others, liberating. If you are feeling this ambiguity right now, know that it is part of the process. It's not necessary to reach a conclusion. Just allow the question to exist. Why deep questions transform more than quick answers. Ollantaytambo doesn't try to convince anyone of anything. It just remains. And in this permanence, reflects something essential: the human capacity to create spaces that transform, to dialogue with greater forces without dominating them, to recognize limits and yet transcend them. In the next step, we will expand this perspective even further, because when we compare Ollantaytambo with other sites around the world, a difficult pattern emerges to ignore, a kind of shared memory of humanity, the same impulse reappearing in cultures separated by oceans and millennia. And perhaps by recognizing this pattern, we can begin to understand why these walls still speak, even after for so long. When Ollantaytambo is placed side by side with other megalithic sites in the world, something begins to emerge with unsettling clarity. This is not a superficial aesthetic similarity, but of structural intention. The same unlikely choices appear again and again. Gigantic blocks adjusted with extreme precision, preference for elevated terrain or geologically active, careful integration between stone, landscape, and sky. It's as if different cultures were answering the same fundamental questions, even without contact with each other. In Egypt, the pyramids align with specific stars. In England, Stonehenge marks solar cycles. In Lebanon, Baalbek supports blocks so large they defy any simple explanation. In the Andes, Ollantaytambo talks to mountains, rivers, and light. In all these places, the effort invested seems excessive if the goal were just functional. There is something more at stake, a search for permanence, for meaning inscribed in the very fabric of the earth. This raises an unknown hypothesis fordable to conventional history. And if these civilizations shared not technology, but a common worldview, one similar understanding of the role of human beings in the cosmos, not as a dominator of nature, but as a conscious participant in a larger system. This vision did not require advanced machines, but refined sensitivity, ability to observe subtle patterns and act in harmony with them. Perhaps what we call fragmented knowledge today was, in the past, a knowledge integrated. Astronomy, architecture, spirituality, and psychology were not disciplines separated. They were different expressions of the same search, understanding the invisible order and reflect this order in the visible world. Build like someone writing a prayer in stone. This would explain why so many of these places seem to carry a similar atmosphere, even separated by continents. A sense of silent gravity, of respect involuntary, not because someone imposed fear, but because the space itself demands attention. He doesn't let himself be consumed quickly. He slows down. Some call this cultural resonance, others from ancestral memory. The little name matters. The effect is real. When a human being comes into contact with something constructed from universal principles, something within him recognizes, not intellectually, but bodily, a deep pre-verbal recognition. Ollantaytambo can then be seen as part of an ancient network, not a physical network, but symbolic. Points spread across the planet that function as anchors meaning, places where humans were invited to remember their relationship with the whole. Each culture expressed this in its own way, with its myths, its symbols, its techniques, but the underlying intention remains surprisingly consistent. This perspective changes everything. The wall stops being an isolated enigma and becomes a phrase within a larger text, a text written over millennia in different stone languages, a text that talks about belonging, responsibility, and continuity, about human consciousness trying to understand itself in the mirror of the cosmos. Perhaps we have lost fluency in this language, but that doesn't mean he has disappeared. We just need to relearn how to listen to him. Places like Ollantaytambo function as silent teachers. They don't explain, they expose. They show what is possible when intention and attention align. This is where the question becomes inevitable. If so many cultures arrived at solutions similar, what does that say about us? About our own ability to create meaning collective? Perhaps the problem is not a lack of knowledge, but an excess of distraction. We build a lot, but we reflect little. We produce quickly, but we forget to ask why. Ollantaytambo stands as a contrast, a work that is not easily explained, but it holds up. That doesn't require belief, just presence. And by demanding presence, it reveals the absence we carry, the distance between what we are and what we could be. As we approach the end of this journey, the mystery condenses. No longer if it only deals with the past or archaeology. It's about choice. What type of relationship we want to have with the world we inhabit. If we continue to treat the earth as resource, or if we remember that she was always a partner. In the next and final step, we will bring all these threads together. Stone, mind, memory, and future. Because the true closure of this mystery does not point back, but inward. And perhaps, by recognizing this, we can finally understand why certain walls never They were made to fall, but to remember. There comes a time when the mystery of Ollantaytambo stops expanding horizontally and begins to point to something essentially human. After observing stones, alignments, global patterns, and psychological impacts, one question remains silent. Why does this place still matter? What exactly remains active there, even after its builders disappeared? Perhaps the answer lies in the idea of continuity. Civilizations pass, but certain gestures remain. Building something that survives time requires more than technique. It requires a vision that goes beyond individual life. Ollantaytambo doesn't look like the work of urgency. There is no improvisation. There is accumulated patience, a commitment to something that builders knew they would not see it complete in terms of meaning. This confronts us with a profound difference between the ancient and modern world. Today, almost everything is designed for immediate use, for quick results, for consumption. Places like Ollantaytambo defy this logic. They don't deliver instant meaning, demand maturation. They require the observer to grow to the point of understanding them, rather than the contrary. Maybe that's why so many interpretations fail. We tried to explain the place without transforming ourselves. We want answers without going through the discomfort of the question. But what do these walls seem to teach is that certain knowledge does not are transmitted or activated. They arise when the mind slows down and attention deepens. Ancient cultures knew this. Therefore, learning was not separate from experience. There was not just instruction. There was a route, physical, and internal path. Climb, wait, observe, feel. Ollantaytambo preserves this logic. He does not reveal himself to anyone who passes by hurried. He opens himself to those who remain. And this has profound implications. It means that the mystery is not locked in the past. It is available at present, but under other conditions. You don't need to belong to one specific culture or believing in a specific spiritual system. Just accept that not all knowledge is accessed with control. Some require delivery. This is perhaps the most disturbing aspect for the modern mentality. No delivery as submission, but as opening. The willingness not to immediately master what is observed, to allow the place to affect, question, reorganize. In Ollantaytambo, this reorganization happens almost imperceptibly. A change of pace, a silence more attentive, a thought that stretches. It is possible that the builders understood something simple and forgot that being human beings need from time to time to be placed in front of something greater than themselves, not to be diminished but to be reoriented, to remember that you are part of a story longer, broader, deeper than his own biography. In this sense, the wall does not separate. It connects. Connects generations that never meet will know, but they share the same ability to ask questions. Who are we? What are we doing here? What is worth remaining after us? These questions they cross time because they do not belong to a specific era, belong to the condition human. Ollantaytambo does not answer these questions. He just creates the space where they can be done honestly, and that is rare. In a world saturated with ready-made answers, a place that raises questions is almost revolutionary. Perhaps the biggest mistake is trying to fit the location into rigid categories. Fortress, temple, observatory. He can be all of these, and yet something beyond. A memory device. A material reminder that we were once capable of thinking and building, on another scale meaning. As we approach the end of this journey, something becomes clear. Ollantaytambo mystery will not be solved, and perhaps that was never the intention. Perhaps it exists to fulfill another function. Keep the restlessness alive, preserve the doubt, protect the question from oblivion. And if so, then these stones are doing exactly their job, not how dead relics but as active presences, waiting not for definitive explanations, but by eyes willing to see beyond the obvious. In the next and final moment, we will allow this uneasiness to settle. Don't stop, shut it down, but to transform it into something quieter. Because some truths don't arrive as answers. They arrive as a gentle return to what was always there. We have reached the point where the mystery of Ollantaytambo no longer demands explanations but silence. After moving through stones, patterns, memories, and questions, something settles, not as a conclusion, but as a presence. Like when an idea stops being thought of and becomes felt. Perhaps that was always the true purpose of the place. No inform, but gently transform those who approach with attention. The walls remain there, motionless, as generations pass by. They don't fight interpretations. They don't defend themselves. They just remain. And in this stay, they offer something rare, a space where time slows down enough for consciousness to breathe, where the urgency of the modern world loses strength and something older, more essential, finds a voice. Perhaps Ollantaytambo's greatest teaching is this: the idea that not everything needs be resolved to be true, that some buildings were not made for answer questions, but to preserve them, to ensure that, even in times of distraction and noise, there are still places capable of reminding us of the fundamental mystery of exist. When we look at these stones, it is easy to project grandiose theories onto them. Civilizations lost, forgotten technologies, extraordinary interventions. All this can be fascinating, but perhaps the most extraordinary aspect lies in something simpler: a human capacity to listen to the landscape, to dialogue with the environment, to build in cooperation with forces greater than the individual ego. This requires humility. It requires accepting limits. It requires recognizing that the world is not just a resource to be exploited, but a presence to be respected. The cultures that raised places like Ollantaytambo seem to understand this deeply, not how moral discourse, but as everyday practice. A living relationship with the earth, with the sky, with the time. What if that relationship hasn't completely disappeared? And if she was just asleep, waiting for contexts to awaken it again? Maybe that's why these places continue to call us, not as tourist attractions, but as mirrors. They reflect how much we have moved away and, at the same time, how much we can still move away from each other. Get closer. Ollantaytambo does not require you to believe in anything specific. He does not impose beliefs. He just invites presence. And in this silent invitation, something rearranges itself. A perception wider, a renewed respect, a sense of belonging that does not depend on identity, nationality, or era. If this journey has touched something in you, not as information but as sensation, perhaps be a sign that certain memories do not just belong to the past. They circulate. They appear when they find fertile ground. And every person who allows themselves to feel, instead of just explaining, it helps keep them alive. We live in a world that values quick responses, but the deepest mysteries, they always move at a different pace. They ask for time. They ask to be listened to. Ask for courage to remain in doubt without immediately transforming it into a conclusion. Ollantaytambo Us offers exactly this training, the art of remaining in the face of the unknown, with reverence. Perhaps, in the end, the megalithic wall is not challenging our engineering but our hurry, our need to control, classify, terminate. Maybe she's in us, teaching us to remember something we have always known but rarely practiced, that the meaning is not necessary. It emerges when we create enough space for it to arrive. If this message touched something for you, subscribe and follow us, not as a gesture automatic, but as the continuation of a journey, because there are many others, places, visible and invisible, that still whisper similar stories. And every step attentive is a form of listening. And before leaving, allow one last question to remain without rushing to answer. And if what we call a mystery is not something to be solved, but something the soul is still trying to remember,